Hello there, and welcome back to another Friday night for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Of course, as always, I am Rafael di Furia to talk a bit more about life abroad, living life abroad as an Italian dual citizen expat. This episode, I wanted to do a little bit of reflecting on Italy and moving to Italy and what I would have done differently. For those of you who may be thinking about moving to Italy, I know there are a lot of you who subscribe to this channel for Italy content. And like I said on the community post, as well as my Instagram and Facebook this week, that even though I'm not in Italy anymore, there will be more about Italy on this channel, but there will be more than only Italy as part of what will be coming here. So part of these will be the things that I would have changed and done differently just based on what I know now. But then there are the things that I maybe wish I could have done differently, but just it would have taken a miracle because it was not possible and that was not the situation that existed or that I was in at the time. But just before we get into the rest of this episode, of course, a huge thank you to the patrons who make episodes like this possible. And for those of you who've also supported Not Your Average Globetrotter through one-time donations, as well as the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more, thank you also very much. And I think it's about time that we get started with this episode, so roll that intro. So the first thing that I can say definitively that I would have changed about what choices I would have made when moving to Italy, the first one would definitely be the first location that I moved to, Alto Adige. Absolutely gorgeous, a wonderful place, but for somebody like me who has an Italian last name, I don't think I would have ever gone there. With what experiences I have and looking back on things now, also regarding work. Work was one of the biggest reasons why I even thought to move there in the first place. I ended up finding out there were a lot of other people that were there for the same reasons. But I think finding work as an English teacher at that time when I was there, I was able to get work much faster than I would have maybe been able to in other places with more convenience to the locations where I could teach from. Granted, many of these locations were very inconvenient, but some of them were better than what I would have maybe had if I had gone to a major city like Rome or Milan or Naples, where I know there are a lot of English teachers who have to travel from one side of the city to the other and go to 50 different locations during the day and not get paid for the travel time. And so that's a big deal. I mean, that's something that's really not uncommon, is not to get paid for travel time or reimbursement for the travel. That comes out of your pocket. So while I was able to find some work fast in my backup field, teaching English, it wasn't my main intention of going there. As some of you know, I have a background in television, production, broadcast, video, media, marketing, like this area, and anything in that area I would have been very happy to get into, but it never happened. There are difficulties about that area, about trying to break in, that it doesn't matter what field you're in, but especially when it's a niche field, in my opinion, that makes it a little bit more difficult because it's such a niche area. And linguistically, if you're not part of certain groups or certain linguistic groups, then there are certain roadblocks that come in your way. Very often I'll say like, yeah, of course you can overcome these issues and get across and make them happen. But this is one place where I personally found some more challenges than I would have liked. So where would I have maybe gone to instead of going to Alto Adige? I ended up specifically in Merano. My intention though was actually to live in Bolzano. Bolzano never ended up happening. Getting an apartment as somebody moving to Italy for the first time without a job contract already, difficult enough. And in a part of the country where things are already expensive, it wasn't easy anyway. There's a lot of demand for rentals, at least when I was there, and I would assume it's still similar today, that there were a lot of demand. So the landlords could be a lot more picky. Even when I left my apartment that I was in, part of the agreement that I had with the landlord to be able to get out of my contract was to find somebody to come in and take things over. I had to show the apartment. And I mean, there were days I was probably showing 15, 20 people in a day. Like too many. It was way too many. Maybe 10, maybe it depended on the day. So for one apartment, you could easily have like 100 people that are trying to get into the same place. So a lot of competition, and it allows those landlords to really be picky with who they want and what they want and how they want. During my time in the country, though, I did hear wherever I was, and whoever I was talking to, whether I was talking to a friend in another part of the country or where I was living or whatever, people always had something really interesting to say about Verona, especially for young professionals. For whatever reason, that name of that city always kept popping up. I'm not saying that it would have necessarily been a great choice for me or that it would have been the right choice, but there's part of me that if I were to do things over again, maybe I would have chosen Verona over Bolzano. But the reason why I wouldn't say a place like Milan or Rome or Naples, I'm not a fan of like huge hustling, bustling cities. Milan, I'm not a fan of. It's fine for a vacation, but especially in the winter, it really gets dark and dreary. And also from my personal experience, there's an attitude that kind of comes along with Milan that's just inherent. And that was something I had never been crazy about in my experience before moving to Italy. It's a city that I would say I know pretty well and had spent a bit of time in. And this was all before I moved to Italy. So this is why I never showed Milan in any of the videos that I made on this channel. But then Rome, for example, again, another hustling, bustling city. It could have worked for me, I think, at least for the type of work that I do, finding more clients there. However, realistically, again, it's another big, hustling, bustling city, and that really wasn't what I was looking for. Verona, I think, would have been that nice balance somewhere in between a city, but not too big of a city, that kind of a Goldilocks zone. But the thing that actually ended up working out the best for me was ending up in Rovigo. And I don't recommend Rovigo to everybody, but for me and my needs and what I was wanting out of a place, Rovigo actually met that. I accidentally came across it through a friend. Some of you know who this friend is that I do the Italian citizenship and real estate podcast through. We had been virtual friends for a while, and he'd been telling me for a while, like, come on down, come visit, like, come check it out, like, come see the office that I have, come see what we're doing, like, let's meet up in person. And so I finally made that happen. And I saw, hey, like, I'm not so happy in Alto Adige. This place is at least Italian, even though it's really Venetian, Veneto. And it's very clear that it's a Veneto city or a small Veneto city. And the people there are the Veneti. It worked for me at the time. I'm not going to say it's the perfect place for everybody, but it was pleasant. I liked it. I enjoyed it. But if I had been in a place like Rome or Verona, maybe a place that had a bit more going on, and even a place that would have been more stable for me, even with a higher cost of living, I don't know if I would have wanted to make that move. Granted, if I were in Verona, that would be a different situation. But anyway, I mean, Rovigo, Padova, it's a hop, skip, and a jump to begin with, so it's not like they're that far apart. But looking back on things and how they went, Rovigo was the right choice for me. Again, I can't say I recommend it for everybody. The thing for me, though, with Rovigo, what ended up really working fantastically was the cost of living there. The rent that I was paying there was super low, especially in comparison to a ton of other areas in the country. So it ended up allow me to kind of breathe, have some space to breathe, and not worry as much as I would have in another place. Having that space to breathe allowed me to build my business and do more with that and have the time and headspace necessary. So removing that huge amount of stress really was massive for me. But you also have to consider where's going to be the right place for you. If you are able to have the removal of that stress from your life, then hey, maybe a smaller city might be the right choice for you. But moving to a smaller city also means fewer opportunities. You got to balance it out and figure out what it is that you need and what is right for you or what might be right for you. You may find even what you hope is right or what you think might be right. You're going to have to change that and flip out to something completely different than you had even imagined. The other thing that I maybe would have done differently, especially as somebody who works on their own, I would have done a little bit more digging into the taxation system and the benefits of having one type of tax file over another type of tax file versus a company versus solo entrepreneur, independent worker. Like I had somebody very good that was helping me with my taxes, but I think that we could have probably got things set up a bit better. So with the type of system that I had in place, I was actually very happy with my taxation and what I was paying per year. Was it a small amount? No, but it could have been a lot worse than it had been. So I'm very grateful that I had the tax expert that I was working with. What we were able to legally structure worked well enough for that need at that time. Within that structure, expenses weren't something that I could deduct for everything that I was doing. There was a chunk of what I was doing per year, a percentage. It may have been 20, 25%. I forget exactly what it was off the top of my head, of what was considered my expenses. And that was just flat across the board. So it was nice to have that. And then so the rest of my income was what was actually taxable. It would have been maybe nice to have a different type of business setup where maybe having your expenses as something that could have been even going beyond that point, because there were a couple of times that my expenses did go beyond that built-in chunk, whatever it was. I can't remember what it was off the top of my head. But if you are working on your own freelance, or you have your own business or whatever it is that you're doing, however you're set up, you'll want to figure out your tax situation and how that can be best worked. Like I said, I was happy with how things went for me, but I think it could have been done better. So I would say put in more time than you think you need. I put in more time than I thought I needed, but I think even having put in more would have potentially been beneficial. But the benefit to the structure that I had was my reporting was annual rather than like quarterly or monthly, where in some other situations, depending on how you're set up within the Italian tax system, there are some situations where you have to declare annually, but then there's other situations where you declare throughout the year. And so that also, though, can get pricey if you have an accountant that you're working with and you have to pay them for each declaration, and it gets pricey quick. So you also, again, have to weigh out the pros and cons. Maybe one thing is going to be a bit easier and maybe have some more benefits, but you may end up paying more for it. But the other thing that you end up paying more for, maybe there's going to be some less headaches with that, or that come along with that, that may in the end allow you to have more time to dedicate what it is that you need to do so that you have more time to make more. But of course, it all depends on how much you're earning and what it is that you're doing and what your needs are. Or the thing that I definitely would have changed, which would have been one of those fantasy things that just wouldn't have been possible, would have been to come to Italy with work already, work online. That was something that I had tried a little bit, but I didn't put time into, because before moving to Italy, I just simply didn't have the time to get my life set up because of the way that everything had happened. I talked about this in earlier episodes. I didn't know if/when I would be able to get my citizenship all completed and finished. I ended up one morning waking up, it was like a Thursday or a Friday. I got the call, hey, you're a citizen now. You can come in tomorrow and request your passport. So it must have been a Thursday morning. And I went the next day and requested my passport. I was in Italy a month later, because at that time I was in another country where I was kind of in this strange situation that I would have had to change to a different type of visa, and changing over to that different type of visa or applying for citizenship in that country would have been this whole huge big deal. And I didn't even want to start going through that. So rather than going through all of that, I left, and my citizenship came just like a month plus like 15 days or something, a month and a few days, whatever it was, before that last visa was going to run up. So I had to do everything very, very quickly. So my advice to anybody going abroad would be to give yourself a little bit of lead time, enough lead time so that you can actually have some things set up and have the ball rolling before you arrive in the country, so that you don't start having to figure out things once you're there. Depending on how you're going to be moving to Italy, you may actually legally have to figure out what it is you're going to be doing there before you get there. You may have to have that job offer. I was blessed to be in the situation because of my ancestry that I could go to Italy as an Italian citizen. That's why I got my Italian citizenship, was so that I could live in Italy as an Italian citizen. So if you are somebody with dual citizenship and you do have that blessing on your plate, then take full advantage of it and figure out how you can arrive and be able to survive. At the very least, try to come with enough money so that you can survive for a while, even if you can't work. Like, if you're just going to be getting off the plane and not having work, you're setting yourself up for some very rough times. Like, again, I was in that position. I kind of had to do that. I had to jump off the plane and hit the ground running and get things rolling quickly. Caused a lot of stress, a lot of sleepless nights, but it was worth it in the end. It was a much rockier, bumpier start, but it paid off for me. I can't say that it would pay off for everybody, because I know other people who've done the same thing and it just hasn't worked out for them, and they had to go back to their home country within a couple of months. So whenever possible, you want to set yourself up for success ahead of time. If you're coming from another European nation, then moving to Italy is going to be much easier. If you're coming from outside of the European Union, then you will have to figure out how you can legally be there and what are the restrictions on being there. Are you going to be there as a student, or are you getting a job, or what is it going to be? So you may have those things where you don't have those questions above your head before you get there. However much of a buffer that you can have, definitely bring that with you. And I'm talking about financial buffer here. So consider what is going to be the cost of living in the place that you'll be. Try to put that out to as long as of a period as possible. Try to stretch that monthly amount out for as many months as possible, because finding a job, in my opinion, in a country like Italy will potentially be a longer process than it may be in, say, if you're coming from America. I would say it might be faster to find some kinds of work there. Of course, in the world that we live in now, that's not necessarily the same case as it was maybe years ago. But jobs in Italy, but you have to consider there is a reason why people are leaving the country. It's not the reason why I left, but really a lot of people leave Southern Europe because finding work in their country isn't easy. My number one recommendation, whenever possible, is to not have to rely on income from Italy if you're going to be living in Italy. If you're going to be living in even Portugal, if you can rely on an income or a level of income that you might have from, say, Germany, England, US, Australia, you're going to probably be living very comfortably in Italy. So the less that you can rely on having to have that income there, the easier that may make your life. I'm not saying that's where I got to, but it was partially my situation. This is why I very often recommend, if you are able to work freelance and build up that kind of clientele, you could, I mean, even if you had, like, say, an American income or an English income or German income, there are parts of the world that you could move to very easily and live like royalty. You could move to some parts of Southeast Asia, some parts of Europe, like, say, maybe Albania or Romania. I mean, even like Portugal to an extent. You could live very well here. I mean, okay, price of living and the cost of rental in some places like Lisbon can be on the high side, but in a lot of the country, cost of living can actually be very, very low. And I will say that so far, from my personal experience, the cost of living here in Portugal seems to actually be a bit less than Italy, especially when it comes to food. Like, that's a different discussion for a different episode. Am I disappointed with any of the choices that I made? No. I think really my time in Italy went as well as it could have. And I would have been there now if it weren't, as I keep repeating, for my family situation. I would have stayed there. My life was comfortable. I was doing all right. And it was getting to the point where things were getting better and better. So I really didn't have much to complain about. I was very grateful. I loved my time in Italy. There were many difficult, very stressful moments and a lot of bumps in the road. But of course, that will go for any country where you move abroad, and especially some types of countries. in certain parts of the world, yeah, you'll have maybe a few more extra little bumps here and there, especially when you go to a country that maybe has a little bit more bureaucracy that you have to deal with. One of the biggest things I probably would have done also was with my internet, that was all through direct debit. And now that I'm not living in Italy anymore, canceling a contract is supposed to be very straightforward and simple, but it ends up being anything but that. Canceling a contract for internet can get very expensive very quickly to have to pay out the rest of the contract. That's acceptable, and then pay out for like the router that it came with, and they overcharged for that router that I at least had in my experience. I'm not saying all companies are and all contracts are like that, but I canceled my contract. I sent in the documentation. Yes, actually sent. I had to send a special letter through a special service to make sure that I would get notified that my letter had actually physically arrived at their doorstep. That's what the person at the store, like I went to the company store and they said, yeah, we can't cancel that here. You have to send this raccomandata to the company. Like, you're kidding me. Come on. So I actually can't now. I'm having a lot of difficulties with canceling my internet connection, and they're still taking out money each month. Like, it's already been 2 months that they've charged me for. The first month I expected I would have gotten charged for anyway. And like, when it comes down to it, because they're going to make me pay for the rest of the contract anyway, I'm going to have to pay it out. But it's annoying that like, there's an amount coming out of my bank account each month because it's still being, this service is active even though I'm not even in the country. So I would have tried to see if there would have been another option to have an internet connection without direct withdrawals, to be able to pay it just by myself every month. From my experience and everything that I looked at, it almost seemed impossible, but if I would go back and change that, that would be the main thing that I would change, to pay that just manually each month. I mean, because also paying a bill in Italy, you will have to actually pay a fee for that. That's the one thing you have to pay. If you're going to do it through your bank or do it at the tabacchi or the post office, you'll have to pay a service fee. So yeah, that adds up. But I mean, say something like my electricity, I was able to pay that through PayPal and that was easy enough. But the other thing with that is that in Italy, what you pay for may not be what you're actually supposed to pay for. So oddly enough, now that I'm not in Italy anymore, the electric company sent me a bill for an apartment that I haven't been in like 2 years plus for like something from however long ago. It was a small amount. Like, we're talking about like in the teens. We're talking about a very small amount. I paid it. They're saying, oh, you have to pay it. I'm like, I was lucky because I had somebody who had received the letter that was able to show it to me and forward that information to me so that I could make that payment. But one of those things that's very annoying to have to deal with when you're not in the country anymore, because from outside of Italy, I can't get in contact with these companies, or at least not easily. So those are probably the most annoying things I had to deal with. So when I sign up for internet here for a fixed line, I am going to make sure, very sure, that it's something that I will pay per month manually, because direct withdrawals it can get messy. I just don't like direct access to my accounts. Just call me old fashioned and funny like that, but I don't like it. It's not a problem about the money being there in the account. I just don't like when someone has access to something that they don't necessarily need that access to. So I think anyway, I'm going to wrap this up here. Of course, as always, a huge, huge thank you to those of you who help to make content like this possible on a monthly basis through Patreon, patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria or RafaelDiFuria.com/Patreon, as well as a huge thank you to those of you who help to support this project through one-time donations, as well as the shirts, mugs, onesies, and more. Of course, as always, I'm Rafael Furia. Thank you so much for joining me again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter on another Friday night. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. Later.